Andrew Gillum isn't giving up yet in the Florida governor's race. So take a look at this short clip from CNN, and you'll see the fascinating development happening in Florida.
Breaking news in Florida, the counting is over. That means the recounting begins. It is official. The races for Florida governor and the Senate seat are going to a statewide recount. The margin of each race was less than 0.5%, which triggers this machine recount. Now, in the Florida's governor's race, Republican Ron DeSantis is still ahead of Democrat Andrew Gillum by only 0.4%. The Senate race is even closer. Republican Governor Rick Scott leads incumbent Democrat Bill Nelson by just 0.15. 0.15, that's barely anything of a percent. Now, President Trump is weighing in on this recount. He's not mincing any words. He just tweeted an unsubstantiated accusation trying to steal two big elections in Florida. We are watching closely, he writes. CNN's Ryan Nobles is in Tallahassee.
In fact, we just heard from a few minutes ago, I just left a press conference with Andrew Gillum, who's the mayor of Tallahassee and who also was the Democratic nominee for governor. You'll remember on election night, he actually conceded the race for governor. Well, he's talking a little bit differently about that concession today. Listen to what Gillum had to say.
I am replacing my words of concession with an uncompromised and unapologetic call that we count every single vote. We count every vote. And I say this recognizing that my fate in this may or may not change. What I do know is that every single Floridian who took time to go out, to cast their vote, to participate in this process, deserve the comfort of knowing that in a democratic society and in this process, every vote will be counted.
Now, people on the right are objecting to this, and they're objecting because Andrew Gillum, when it looked like the election was over on election night, he gave a concession speech. Now, the fact of the matter is that as the votes kept rolling in, they were rolling in at the very end in predominantly Democratic districts, and that gap kept closing and closing and closing and closing. And now we're at the point where it triggers an automatic recount. That's how small the gap is. So, and again, automatic recount. So that is like the default. Like, oh, now we have to recount because we're within 0.5 of a percent. So for him to come out there now and say, hey, let's count every vote. Let's do that. That is the least surprising thing to me and the least offensive thing I've ever heard. The real scandal, the real offensive thing is that the people on the right are trying to act like, no, wrap it up. It's over. Shut the fuck up. It's done. It's over. And actually, you know what? I take that back slightly because it's not surprising. Of course they're going to do that because they want their guy to win. But they really do want their guy to win by any means necessary, even if it means, hey, he actually lost the vote. But on election night, it seemed like he was going to win. Therefore, let's shut this whole thing down and make sure Ron DeSantis gets in. Now, here's why this is so incredibly important, what's happening right now. Many of you don't know this. But in the year 2000, when it was the presidential election between Al Gore and George W. Bush, the entire vote came down to Florida, one of the most crucial swing states in the country. And it was basically too close to call on that night. And you had some outlets, including Fox News, they said, fuck it, just call it for Bush and see what happens. And so they called it for Bush. So the default in the conversation, instead of, the conversation being, hey, it's too close to call, the default, and every other media outlet parroted it after Fox News, the default was, oh no, Bush won. And the fact, Al Gore, he wants a recount? You're fucking sour grapes over here. What are you doing, man? Shut up and take the L. Be an adult. What are you doing? And the Democrats at a national level and at the state level in Florida slowly but surely all conceded and bent the knee. Now, the scary thing is Al Gore actually won Florida. Now, again, I just said a lot of you might not know this, but he did win Florida. So in November of 2001, the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago announced the results of this giant examination that they did of all 170,000 undervotes and overvotes in the 2000 election. And the NORC found that with a full statewide hand recount, Gore would have won Florida under every possible vote standard. Depending on which standard was used, his margin of victory would have varied from 60 votes to 171 votes. So again, for those of you who don't know or remember or didn't hear about what happened in Florida, there was this giant issue because the way that they did the votes at the time, there were these things called hanging chads. So it's like you punch through to say, oh, I'm voting for Gore, but you didn't push it all the way through. And so it's clear that you tried to vote for Gore, but the chad, which is the part that's supposed to come out when you push through, is hanging. So, and then there were the dimpled chads. Like, okay, I'm going to try to vote for this one, but the chad isn't even hanging. The chad is just dimpled. So it's like you clearly tried to vote for one of the candidates. That was your intent, but you just didn't push through hard enough for whatever reason. You could be 85-year-old grandma, whatever the fuck. But basically, there was a giant court process over it. The Supreme Court shut it all down on preposterous grounds. They basically said, hey, the way they do the votes in the different districts is not equal in the different districts. So under the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, we're going to just shut it down and say that Bush won. What the fuck? It was the most politically hacky argument ever. And, you know, other courts had said, no, you go by the intent of the voter and do a recount. But again, by any... when you actually counted all of the votes in a reasonable way, you had Gore win no matter how you counted it. And it was the fact that all the Democrats conceded and bent the knee, which then led to Bush becoming president. And of course, we all know what happened with George W. Bush in the Oval Office. He honestly, he was one of the worst presidents in American history. So, a lot in history comes down to weird things at very specific times, and the fact that the Democrats were weak and conciliatory really led to one of the worst presidencies ever, and you could definitely make the case that if it wasn't for the Democrats doing the wrong thing then, that Gore would have been president, and at the very least, we would have never had the Iraq War. You know, hey, maybe you say, yeah, he would have gone into Afghanistan after 9/11 because Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and yada yada. Okay, maybe. I don't know, but maybe. But Iraq was not going to happen. So Democrats need to stand up and fight, and to have Andrew Gillum come out there and say, no, we're going to count every vote. I 1,000,000% agree. And just so you know, guys, like, lives are depending on this. If I'm not mistaken, the Medicaid expansion in Florida is depending on this. If Andrew Gillum wins, Florida accepts the Medicaid expansion. If DeSantis wins, they do not accept the Medicaid expansion. And if you don't accept the Medicaid expansion, people literally die as a result of that because they don't have health care. So, super important. I'm glad Andrew Gillum is fighting. Every single national Democrat should either back him up or shut the fuck up. If you think like, no, just fucking give it to DeSantis, fuck you. Keep your mouth shut. At the very least, don't get in the way of what the party is trying to do and what individual Democrats are trying to do, because those Democrats are correct. And my guess is people who are on the proper side of this probably learned the lessons of history.